Hello and welcome to a new video here on my channel. Today I'm presenting to you my story Aurora and the Dawn of Magic part 2. I hope you really like it, and if you like it, leave a like and comment down below, and then let's start with the story. Let's go.
When Aurora saw the finished armor laid out before her, she felt her mind too tired to craft a matching wand from Lumetit. It was far too laborious and difficult. She decided to save the remaining Lumetit for later. Luckily, it isn't too hard to store Lumetit. I can always use it sometime in the future, Aurora thought as she placed the leftover Lumetit into her backpack, which, spatially speaking, didn't seem like it should fit. The backpack's opening widened and swallowed the oversized chunk of Lumetit. Aurora watched the intricate well-matrix patterns on the pack's surface dim and go dark as the bag returned to its normal appearance, and she felt quietly pleased that she had made it. Another bound artifact. It had taken her about 2 months to craft, but it had been worth the effort. Now I just need to find a way to get to one of the nearby villages or towns without attracting too much attention, she thought as she studied her silvery, gleaming armor, a helmet with no slits or visor to look through. But that wasn't a problem. After all, the rune matrix inside the helmet lets me see through it as if it weren't there. I still can't quite believe I managed to make this so quickly. That's a new personal record. Last time I worked with Lumetit I never managed to make anything this complex. It was difficult just to get it to work at all. I mean, I basically just coded my book in Lumetit. But still, this is a masterpiece, Aurora thought, impressed, as she donned the armor. As she put the pieces on, each segment felt as if it fused to her body. That was thanks to the orichalcum, the living metal blended with adamantite and another alloy she didn't fully recognize. The armor's liquid inner padding felt alive, one of the finest cushioning and shock absorption systems ever produced in the Elven Empire, not by accident but by design. The outer shell was simple metal, but the inner lining, the part she hadn't altered, was made from a metal that, combined with Lumetit, would yield unparalleled strength. The moment the armor was fully fitted, Aurora silently thanked her brother Raoul for not asking too many questions about why she wanted armor with the best padding but the simplest, non-magical outer shell. He'd looked puzzled, but that had been a cycle and a half ago. The memory was still fresh, as if it had happened yesterday. I really have a very kind little brother. What would I have done without him? I couldn't have finished 90% of my projects, and 90% of my excuses for disappearing from the palace wouldn't have worked without him. He's helped me so much. But now I must be very careful. Nobody must find out that I actually possess a full Lumetit suit. How can I disguise it? I can't easily change Lumetit's properties. It's nearly impossible to manipulate even with alchemy. I was lucky my theory on remolding Lumetit worked at all. Otherwise I'd have had to assemble it from many tiny beads like chainmail, which wouldn't be nearly as effective if I couldn't properly forge the Lumetit itself. So I can't change much about the Lumetit, I'll have to paint the surface instead. That should work with a single spell once I regenerate enough magic. No one should suspect it's pure Lumetit. Okay, I can do that now. My magic has regenerated, Aurora thought as she activated a spell that, while not trivial to restructure, did in fact work. She realized she couldn't alter Lumetit's pigments directly, but she could lay a layer of pigments over it, the third layer covering the pure white crystalline armor she wore. Within seconds her magic had recovered enough for her to conjure a mirror before her. The mirror was only an illusion and now reflected exactly the appearance she wanted. It wasn't a temporary trick. The armor's new black finish with gold filigree was effectively permanent, fortunately also easily reversible. Man, oh man, this is cool. I can draw pigments from the environment, amplify them with magic, and essentially glue them onto my armor. Great. The spell is practically useless for anything beyond changing colors, but at least I can alter appearances without destroying or significantly affecting the underlying material. Maybe I'll do my hair too, Aurora thought proudly of her little, efficient spell. One of those oddities, some spells are simple and devastatingly powerful, while others are immensely complicated yet barely consume energy. Invisibility and pure light illusions are a prime example, insanely complex, but not terribly taxing, because they merely reshape light. As Aurora started moving out, she was grateful her grimoire contained the necessary intelligence about the kingdom she'd landed in. It was called Gaia, and she was currently at the outer fringe of that human realm. Gaia was, by far, the most tolerant kingdom toward mythical and magical races. They were not openly hostile to the heteromorphic races, the demi-human peoples. In simple terms, this land functioned as a neutral zone where humans weren't uniformly hostile to fabled beings. The kingdom had prospered thanks to cooperation between humans and several exiled fabled peoples, some dwarves, and other creatures, blossoming in a way no other human realm had. Aurora still couldn't understand why other lands were so strict against fable folk or even openly anti-magic. Witch hunts occurred in some of the smaller nations, where any magical being who wasn't a human sorcerer was hunted, which was ironic, because magic is a fundamental energy and isn't inherently good or evil. Okay, I thought the path wouldn't take this long. I'll have to make camp here, then. Aurora thought as she realized the whole day had passed and she hadn't gotten very far. Darkness fell and fatigue crept into her bones and through her whole body. Thanks to the armor, which had no weak points like a visor slit to look through or to be shot through, and no gaps in the lumeted plating for mobility, Aurora Borealis felt far more comfortable and secure sleeping in it. The only part that made its weight known was the liquid padding inside, and that layer made her feel cocooned and warm, as if wrapped in a soft blanket. As Aurora began to yawn, she still detected no traces of magic around her. No magical monsters, no magical signatures indicating rituals or spells, so she leaned her back against a stone on the path and started to relax. Creator Aurora, do you really want to sleep in the armor? Isn't it uncomfortable? Won't you get sore muscles? Asked Seeker Akasha, the grimoire that still circled her like a planet around its star. It was shut now and no longer fluttered pages, but it kept orbiting. No, this armor isn't uncomfortable at all. It's actually very comfortable. I hardly notice its weight, let's just say I'm built like a matchstick. I lack muscle, so I probably couldn't wear any ordinary armor. If it were plain metal, I wouldn't get far on foot. So yes, I'll sleep in the armor, Aurora replied and yawned again. As she stretched, the armor adjusted. For a brief moment, as her arms lengthened with the stretch, Aurora felt the liquid padding, her armor's cushioning, her aura, absorb the uncontrolled magic she emitted even while clothed, like a sponge. As Aurora slowed her movements and her breathing evened, she found everything fell within her expectations. The two metals, orichalcum and adamantite, that made the liquid padding met her hopes, even if it was surprising that the padding absorbed magic rather than containing it. It's a little odd that it doesn't behave exactly as I expected, but whatever, absorbing more of the magic I radiate doesn't hurt. I can't use that aura anyway, it's only a fraction of the magic I hold. So it can take it, as long as it doesn't pull magic from my core, Aurora thought as she drifted off to sleep. The next morning a bird's chirping woke Aurora. She had slept surprisingly long for an elf. The fresh mountain air of the range where she'd slept drifted through her helmet and brought a smile to her lips. The air was crisp, but she wasn't cold thanks to the armor, an oddity that confused her for a second, since she didn't remember engraving any warming spell into it. A quick check showed no adverse effects, the armor provided only positive protection. When Aurora rose, none of her muscles were stiff and she felt completely safe. Nothing had attacked her, nothing was missing from her person or her pack. Her grimoire, Seeker Akasha, hovered in the same position it had when she fell asleep. Thanks for watching over me, Seeker Akasha. That's really kind of you, Aurora said, not treating the book much differently than a helpful elf. Then her stomach growled, drawing her and the book's attention to the fact she would need food sooner or later. Being an elf made that a little easier to endure, but Akasha insisted she take in enough nourishment and not trek to the nearby village on an empty stomach. The smile on Aurora's face grew wider. She realized the grimoire, beyond its primary function of recording knowledge, also had a practical purpose, to keep her alive. It felt almost maternal, making sure she ate. Aurora, whose studies had focused on magic, could hardly recall the basics she should have learned in elementary magical schooling, like which plants were edible. Master Seeker Akasha, I'm not really sure what I can eat. We could hunt a monster, a level 1-1, or do human lands use a different ranking system for monster strength? Aurora asked. There is a ranking system that clearly indicates monster strength in human territories, the grimoire replied. The system most widely used mirrors the strength scale employed by the Adventurers Guild. The Adventurers Guild is an organization present across many human kingdoms, and even in some magical realms, and together with the Merchants Guild forms a transcontinental network that isn't subject to any single king or realm. Even the Emperor of the Elven Empire had little influence over the Merchants Guild after it spread here 100 cycles ago. The Merchants Guild acts as a kind of commercial bank and trade network. They trade, buy, sell, and store wealth for those who can't protect their own money. The Adventurers Guild, while younger than the Merchants Guild, is rapidly gaining influence. They rank adventurers from Iron up to Void. From Iron upward the ranks are Iron, Bronze, Silver, Gold, Platinum, Amber, Amethyst, Starlight, Moonlight, and finally the highest and most powerful rank, Void, which no one has yet achieved. Aurora let her gaze sweep the beautiful, mountainous landscape where trees grew in abundance. The trees were a dark green, and some mountains formed odd half-arches, with forests growing on those strange ridges, an enchanting sight. Rivers, trees, plants, the world still filled her with wonder. It struck her as odd and almost tragic that humans always found ways to exploit such beauty, resources, logging, forest clearing. She couldn't claim moral superiority. In her pursuit of knowledge, power, and influence she might act similarly. To your right along the path grows a small tree out of the rock face. Its dark blue fruit is edible and quite sweet. You should probably pick them all, Seeker Akasha suggested, marking the tree with a light spell so its fruit glowed faintly blue. Aurora plucked the fruits with a string of weak, nearly costless spells that severed them from the branches and gathered them midair, almost like telekinesis but pure magic. Seeing the fruits float before her, Aurora was quietly thrilled to use her magic freely without fear of discovery. In the Akkadian palace she could never have cast so often without risk. Now it felt liberating. To her surprise, as she moved a fruit toward her helmet it passed straight through part of the helm as if it weren't there and landed in her mouth. Well, that's unexpected. For some reason my armor can become permeable, and it flickered at that spot. Interesting, definitely worth testing. Let's see the limits of this armor, Aurora thought, experimenting with her magic in the suit. Lumeted had the curious property of adapting to all forms of magic. When she passed light magic through it, the supposedly rigid armor became permeable, allowing her to touch objects without the physical barrier in between, even while she still wore the suit. The possibility impressed her. With a little illusion magic it could appear she wore something else, though she remained armored. Aurora saw how many uses the suit offered. These were just functional abilities, not even counting its raw durability. All right, that's surprising. But I want to move faster. Walking every day will get tedious. Can you fetch me coordinates I need to teleport to that mountain in my line of sight? It should be much closer to the village I seek than walking all the way, Aurora asked, pointing to a distant peak. Her grimoire was silent for seconds, and just when Aurora thought it wouldn't answer, the air around her rippled. Magic poured from the book and, for the first time in the grimoire's existence, it cast without her direct input. It didn't structure the spell, the book did. Aurora watched the teleportation spell she had once recorded activate. The world blurred for a fraction of a second and then reformed. In the next moment she stood in a clearing between two towering trees. Sunlight filtered through the leaves, painting the ground with a stunning pattern of light. Countless tiny motes shimmered as Aurora gathered herself and found her voice. She sensed the magical presence of several magical animals, monsters, in the broad sense, creatures mutated by magic. That didn't mean they were dangerous. Their signatures were roughly as strong as hers, indicating very weak magical beings. More stirring than the forest's beauty was the realization that her book had evolved and could now cast spells it held. With practice, this could be a battlefield advantage, since the grimoire could function as a magical store. The journey thus became far more efficient, and before evening she was already within sight of the village. She hadn't expected the banishment ritual to fling her this far into the wilderness. The village was unremarkable, small stone walls, people bustling like ants. At the main gate stood armed villagers in meager leather armor. Aurora doubted they could even scratch her suit if she chose to approach. But before I step into this human village without being sure that I'll actually be safe there, I should probably take a few precautions. Maybe I should set up some safeguards so that nothing happens to me. But, that might be overdoing it a little. I mean, it could look paranoid if I tried to perform a ritual now. And carrying out a ritual, especially the one I have in mind, will be much harder if I'm already inside the village, under the eyes of the guards. Aurora thought as she considered her next move. A ritual came to mind, one that could help her greatly. The problem was that she would be vulnerable while performing it. Another issue was that blood magic was usually dismissed as evil, though in reality, concepts like good and evil didn't exist in any absolute sense. Akasha, I'm not sure if I should really perform the ritual using a sacrifice from the forest. There should be a monster strong enough for it. But the problem is, I think the ritual might attract the villagers' attention. And I don't want to be hunted down for practicing blood magic. Aurora Borealis of Arcadia spoke hesitantly, uncertain about her plans, especially the ritual. You don't need to worry about that. This remote human village has no mages strong enough to perceive at such a distance. The chances of some random villager possessing magic sight with a perception range that could reach you here are extremely slim. In short, I don't think anyone would be able to detect your ritual. But whether or not you're willing to take that risk is your decision. The grimoire replied. As Aurora weighed the pros and cons, she considered that it might also be better to simply enter the village, learn more about human civilization, and study how their adventurers' guilds were structured. Performing the ritual could always be postponed for another time. On the other hand, it would be very useful now, since it would cleanse her body of impurities and grant her a significant muscle boost, raising her physical strength to the level of an average soldier in the Elven Empire. But then she realized, the need for blood magic and a life sacrifice came only from her pitifully low reserves of magic. If she were to use her own magic, she would end up killing herself. The very thought made her shudder. That was a risk she was unwilling to take. To Aurora, it seemed absurd that some forms of magic shouldn't be used simply because they weren't popular. After all, blood magic could be learned just like any other discipline. In theory, anyone could master it. Aurora couldn't fathom who first came up with the idea of labeling magic as good or evil. The notion that some magics would corrupt a person while others would not struck her as nonsensical, since such concepts had no real bearing on energy itself. She resolved not to let this flawed perspective restrict her own path. She knew she would regret it in the future if she didn't seize every tool and walk every path of magic available to her. All right, I've decided, Akasha. I'll do the ritual. I'm just not sure how many monsters I'll have to kill, Aurora said, realizing that the ambient magic in the air was much weaker than she had expected. The monsters in this forest seemed weaker than those in Arcadia. Which made sense, given that this land had far less magic than Arcadia itself. As she began her preparations, engraving runes into the ground in a circular pattern and holding a small pearl in her hand, she was grateful she had discovered the trick of creating magic crystals. It was a spell that could completely overturn the financial systems of the magical world. If this secret ever spread, it would destabilize every magical nation's economy, as all trade relied on magic crystals or naturally grown crystals as currency. If people could simply create their own, money itself would become worthless. Or, it could turn the world upside down in a different way. Imagine spells and rituals fueled by more magic than ever before, since everyone would have access to cheap, rechargeable reservoirs. It could drive magical development forward, but it would also throw the world into chaos. Aurora reflected on the dual-use nature of her secret, weighing both the positive and negative outcomes of revealing it. It took her 10 minutes to carve all the runes perfectly. A few leaves drifted onto the symbols, but that didn't matter. The runes only needed to exist, whether or not they were visible. The required sacrifice, a living being, since a magic crystal would not suffice, was an unfortunate monster. It resembled a mix between an elephant and a saber-toothed tiger, standing 6 meters tall and 12 meters long. Horn-like protrusions jutted from its body, giving it an oddly endearing appearance. But cuteness was not something that would stop Aurora from reaching her goals. When she saw that all the runes were ready, she realized the time had come to leave her armor. Others might think her paranoid if they knew how many magic crystals she had wasted on a barrier around the ritual site, or how much energy she had spent to avoid being disturbed. But she didn't care. Better to be called paranoid than to end up dead. After making part of her armor permeable and stepping out of it, Aurora still wasn't entirely satisfied. The armor stood motionless, unable to protect her in its current state. She wondered if she could create one more layer of security, and then she had an idea. I wonder if this will work. Akasha, enter the armor. I permit you to move it and protect me if necessary. She watched in surprise as her grimoire flipped itself open, pages turning on their own, before floating up and down slightly, as if agreeing with her idea. The armor shimmered, became permeable again, and the book slipped inside. A few seconds later, the armor moved and bowed before her. Aurora, you were right. It is indeed possible for my pseudo-soul to function as the control unit of this armor. Akasha said. Then let us begin the ritual. Akasha, you'll play my bodyguard, and I suppose I'll play the helpless princess. Aurora said with a faint smile as she set the rite in motion. It was not nearly as spectacular as she had imagined for her first use of taboo magic, the kind of sorcery declared forbidden in her empire, and for which she very well could have been executed. The thought of being put to death for practicing magic sent cold shivers down her spine as she stripped off her clothes and laid them in a neat pile on a nearby stone in the little clearing, where the sun could warm and dry them. Aurora had to admit she was pitifully out of shape. Even the brief walking in armor had left her sweating. It wasn't nakedness that made Aurora feel exposed so much as helplessness. Without armor, without protection, a single misstep, a stray spell, would blow her mind apart, leaving her dead like any other mortal. No matter how strong her fate might be, if she didn't fight to survive and someone breached her barrier, she would die, her head missing, her life ended. The certainty of vulnerability gnawed at her as she prepared. As the monster's life ebbed and the rite began to take hold, Aurora stepped forward into the center of the largest circle. Her heart hammered as the ceremony's effects unfurled. The creature's corpse dissolved into red streams of light and mist that drifted slowly, sluggishly through the air toward her. Okay, that was the easy part. Now comes the harder part. And I'll have to do much more unpleasant things, she thought as a searing, blistering pain tore through her body and her muscles fought to clamp shut. Aurora forced herself not to flinch. If her body trembled and she fell from the circle, far worse consequences would follow than mere agony during a physical restructuring. Those would be her least problems. By the 5th minute of the ritual, when her body could barely remain standing under the strain and pain, Aurora nearly regretted having begun it. Yet she also knew the effects would be lasting. The rite would make her fragile body less weak, help circulate her magic better, and finally allow her training to begin. Dying midway through training because of a frail body would be disastrous. Yes, I knew this would hurt to perform, but I didn't know it would hurt this much. My muscles feel like jelly, completely useless, Aurora thought as her muscles burned and consciousness teetered on the brink of blacked-out oblivion. She could not allow herself to lose awareness. That would mean the ritual had failed, and failures in blood magic carried consequences far worse than the ritual's collapse. Then, as abruptly as it had begun, the pain ceased. The lights dimmed, the runes vanished. No trace remained, except for the residue on the ground, which at least spared her the chore of scraping burned symbols away. Aurora tried to speak, but her limbs went slack and her mind drifted. Before she slipped into unconsciousness, she glimpsed a black and gold armor moving toward her, and then everything went black. When she came round, evening had fallen. Confused, she became aware of a warm, pleasant liquid coating her skin, as if her whole body had been immersed in it. Strangely, the fluid felt metallic to the touch. The next thing she noticed, beyond the odd sensation on her bare skin, was that her muscles no longer ached so painfully. Looking down to inspect herself, she saw only armor where her naked form should have been. Okay, I didn't expect to find my armor on me, but that's definitely a positive. At least I'm not lying here unconscious with my artifacts poking me from the ground, Aurora thought, already aware that she should move on. The remnants of blood magic and the fallen monster might attract attention. I took the liberty of guiding the armor so it folded around you, Creator. I thought putting the armor on you while you were unconscious would ensure your safety best, Akasha said. It took Aurora a few seconds to process that information. She looked at Akasha, the closed book hovering before her in the air as if the world's gravity had no hold on it, with surprise. Okay, you really surprised me. You thought that far ahead and slipped the armor back over me to protect me after I blacked out following the ritual, Aurora said as she pushed herself up, her legs still wobbling. Leaving the site clean would be difficult. Aurora preferred to leave quickly and hope the ambient magical radiation would erase the traces left by the rite. She knew how hard it was, even for the most professional, experienced mages, to read an echo. Even if Gaia could field mages as skilled as those in the Elven Empire, they still wouldn't be great at recording an echo and tracking someone down, if they even knew echoes existed or how to listen for them. Somehow I feel uneasy leaving the echo of my magic behind. I doubt anyone will find it in a few minutes or that some random villager would be the kind of person who could retrace it, but you can never say never, and the uncertainty makes me uneasy, Aurora told her book through the strange connection that linked them. Not quite words, not exactly pure thought, but something between. Then apply the Zaubermasken ball to a few crystals and use them as bombs to obliterate the surroundings and make too many magical signatures overlap. It would cost at most 3 crystals and would blur the traces, and might even start a forest fire, Akasha suggested. Aurora reached into her pack and pulled out 3 small pearls, white and milky with an oily, rainbow sheen on their surface. She rolled them in her armored hand. Strangely, the spheres didn't fall from her palm even without deliberately using a spell, just the natural energy in the air and some instinctive magic she couldn't quite measure in that moment. Small supernatural phenomena like that happened more often in a mage's presence. It took little time for her to cast the Zaubermasken ball on the crystals. The magic she needed in them wasn't formless or colorless energy this time, it had to be fire. The white glow of the beads shifted slowly to red and pulsed like a tiny heartbeat. After a few seconds, when Aurora had given the correct commands to her magic, she flung them behind her and let the spell do the rest. The air around her blurred as Akasha activated a teleportation at the exact instant the explosions tore everything apart. Trees detonated, splintering into shards, everything within several meters was wrecked. The magical barrier that had been lowered did nothing to stop the flames. When Aurora reappeared on the opposite side of the blast, she saw the village before her and the fire where the explosion had occurred in the forest. I assume you collected the ritual crystals we no longer need under the barrier, right, Akasha? Aurora asked without moving her lips beneath the helm. Yes, you're correct, Aurora, the grimoire answered, an answer that surprised her slightly, because Akasha had been calling her Creator so insistently before, it felt oddly more personal to be addressed by name, even if no one else could hear. Aurora walked toward the village, relying on the fact that she had arrived from the far side of the woods and could plausibly claim no connection to the fire. Boldness had always worked for her. Humans and even some elves fell for the confidence she displayed. It was almost laughable how easily people accepted the impression of certainty. Stop, traveler. What brings you here? One of the guards at the gate demanded as another watched the flames in the forest. I'm hungry. I want something to eat. And I want to learn more about this kingdom, Gaia, I believe it's called. I'm from far away, Aurora replied, which was true. Elves aren't wholly incapable of lying, but their culture made deception less common. Most elves would rather suffer than betray their conscience. Exceptions, of course, exist. Aurora had no problem lying when it suited her purpose. You can't just come in and be let through. We need to check who you are and whether you've committed a crime, said the guard on the left, turning his gaze away from the flames to her. Feel free to check if I've committed crimes in this realm. You won't find anything, Aurora said as she took an identification card from her pack. The card looked like metal covered in a web of fine, delicate lines. It was an ID card keyed to its user. The magical signature on it couldn't be forged by anyone in this world, or at least that was what everyone believed. Even with her heavenly eyes, Aurora couldn't falsify another person's magical signature. That wasn't the goal of the Maskenball spell anyway. The spell's aim was to create a completely new identity, disguising the subtle flaws and micro-variations of a signature to make a new, plausible pattern. The guards examined the card, crafted of 67% adamantite, and checked the signature stored within, which could only be released when held by the card's rightful owner. As they inspected it, Aurora thought about what made an aura and a signature. A person's aura is the natural magical radiation every magic-bearing individual emits, animals included. A signature, however, is different. It's the pattern magic wears like an undercurrent, unique because of personality and memory. For reasons unknown, a signature doesn't change across an individual's lifetime and cannot be forged. It's the most elusive and hardest thing to prove, why only adamantite can preserve a signature long enough to be used for identification. Adamantite is one of the 6 rarest materials in the world, prized not just for its isolation of magic but also for storage and other magical properties. It's extremely valuable, though not quite as rare as orichalcum. Orichalcum, true living metal, isn't called that for nothing. It changes itself and appears to be alive in many respects. The precise qualities of the living metal are difficult even for the best alchemists and artifact smiths to describe. It rarely forms a hard substance on its own. It's fundamentally soft and needs other materials to be useful. Pure orichalcum would be as impractical as a wooden sword. Okay, it seems you haven't committed crimes in the kingdom of Gaia. You're clean. You may enter, the guard said. He and his companion missed the small smile that crossed Aurora's lips when she heard they'd found nothing on her. Their angle of view didn't allow them to see. Aurora's thoughts flicked to the bombing she'd arranged, to the charges she'd placed and the asteroids she'd drawn down from the sky to distract her family from tracking her teleportation coordinates. If she hadn't killed anyone, which was unlikely, since elves aren't easily slain, she had still probably caused hundreds of injuries. Then again, perhaps the barriers had been stronger than she'd thought and nothing had been seriously harmed. As Aurora entered the village, she wondered why no one had demanded an entrance fee, whether it was because of the armor or her book which she still hadn't managed to tuck away in her pack or some other reason she couldn't see. The guards had let her through. The villagers, short-lived creatures whose lives rarely exceeded 100 cycles, were intensely curious about the stranger allowed into their town. Their eyes tracked her every move. For a few seconds Aurora realized she could barely tolerate the attention. Standing at the center of so many watching faces should have been familiar after all her interactions with commoners in her own realm, but it felt so different among such ephemeral beings. Compared to an elf's lifespan, a human life was fleeting. Within a few hundred cycles they were often forgotten. Even the poorest elf might live at least 400 cycles and would outlive many generations of humans. An elf returning after a few cycles would likely find grandchildren already living. Aurora truly did not understand how the people of that village found meaning in lives so brief and fragile. Well then, time to finally buy something to eat. I need money for that, Aurora thought as she headed toward the merchant's guild, her stomach growling. She was quietly grateful she'd been born an elf. Life in another civilization was hard for her to imagine. Aurora expected the merchants' guild to be better organized than the adventurers' guild, and she was surprised at how similar they were when she entered the main hall. Men, mostly muscular, stood in lines waiting to sell what they had hunted. They were the kind of thugs who made her feel like she'd need to put on a show. The hall was large and airy, enchanted lightly so it didn't smell or feel stuffy. The reception desk, behind which the usual clerks sat and handled transactions, was ornate and orderly. Well, what do we have here? Someone new in shiny armor. Overcompensating for something, a thick-fisted, muscle-bound man sneered. Aurora didn't feel threatened in the least. Her best weapons knew that men like these could not even scratch Lumetit. Hey, if you're new here, you should at least introduce yourself, another of the brutes said. The kind of thug that appears in every culture and every one of the 7 empires, more brawn than wit. One of them. Aurora didn't care which, laid a hand on her armor pretending friendliness while his fingers tried to pick the pack slung over her shoulder. To his surprise the rucksack felt empty, yet behaved as if full. What a lovely book you have under your arm. May I have a look? A coarse-voiced woman asked, which surprised Aurora. She hadn't expected the typical bandit clique to include a woman. When the woman reached for the book, Aurora spoke for the first time. I would advise you not to touch that book unless you want very severe injuries, she said in a calm, male-sounding voice, utterly unruffled, as if none of these people could affect her. The woman ignored the warning and grabbed the grimoire. Aurora allowed it to be taken without fighting. The instant the book left her touch, the world seemed to remember that a 10,000-page tome should not be light. As if cosmic rules judged the theft unjust, the book was dragged downward with unnatural force, crushing the hand of the unlucky person holding it. I warned you not to touch my book, Aurora said, her altered voice devoid of emotion. Just you wait, this will cost you, one of the brutes with a bald forehead snarled. The woman swallowed through the pain and pulled her hand free. There was a flicker of fear in her eyes and something thoughtful where greed had been. Her fire-red hair shimmered in the lamplight. Everyone in the room watched the commotion, but Aurora barely paid any attention even as the thugs drew daggers and clubs and advanced, hurling threats. One man lunged, his dagger struck Aurora's armor and rebounded with no effect. The clubs shattered uselessly. Aurora barely noticed the impacts as she stood within her suit and waited for her attackers to exhaust themselves. Her gaze dropped to the woman trying to free her hand from beneath the book. The woman clenched her teeth and looked intelligent in a calculating, survival-minded way, sizing Aurora up and realizing someone wearing such armor could not be of ordinary origin. Her intent was obvious: get away from this and not prolong the conflict. Aurora found that far more interesting than the men's futile violence. You're far more interesting to me than the rest of your gang. Tell me, why rob someone who might be stronger than you? Maybe you could enlighten me, and I'll help free your hand from the book, Aurora said. The woman said nothing and met Aurora's gaze with a mixture of fear and defiance. Fine. Then I'll do what I came to do, Aurora replied, rising and ignoring the small crater the book had left in the ground and the person bound beneath it. When she stood, Aurora noticed the 5 thugs, apparently not popular in the merchants' guild, were visibly spent. Woman remained unwilling to speak, so Aurora proceeded with her plan. She reached into the rucksack no one had managed to separate from her and pulled out another card. This one was filigree work, more intricate, with complex runes and patterns. It was a trusted card, usable only by someone designated as a confidant by its creator. The technology was the same as the identification cards widespread across kingdoms, but this companion card would be useless to anyone lacking Aurora's magical signature. In her case, the trusted card belonged not to anyone random but to Merlin, her second secret identity, the persona that had revolutionized the world's magic in a few short cycles. Many of her spells were known here, things like the Eternal Light, an energy-efficient illumination she had invented, an original spell with no prototype, a brand new creation that didn't require constant magical supply. Well then, I suppose I'll lend myself some money. I can't exactly use Merlin's card, that would immediately reveal who I am, and my family would trace me. At least this proves I'm a confidant of someone extremely wealthy. The conditions on this card should make tracing funds hard, unless someone really tries. I could forge money, but that's unnecessary now. I have enough. Aurora thought. How can I help you, mister? The friendly woman behind the counter asked as Aurora approached. Aurora laid the card on the table, the clerk's eyes widened in surprise. I'd like 1,000 more from this account, Aurora said, setting down the trusted card.
Thank you for your attention. That was it for today. I hope you really liked it. And if you liked it, leave a like and comment down below. On the left side of the screen you see now the newest video I uploaded. On the right side of the screen you see now the playlist. Until next time, take care and goodbye.